So for example, let's say you have a girlfriend who's having romance problems, right? And you want to help her. You say, Mary, come over here, let me show you something. And you open the book to the scale of relationships. You say, look at this. She'll look at it and she'll say, you mean there's a scale of relationships? I never heard of such a thing. And you say, yeah, this relationship that you're having so much trouble with, where is that relationship on this scale? She's going to want to know that because she's having trouble. See? So what will probably happen is,
hello and welcome to the Evolving with Jessica podcast. My name is Jessica. I am an integrative nutrition health coach, a holistic skin healing guide, and certified life coach. In this podcast, we cover topics such as holistic health and wellness, nutrition, and spirituality. If you enjoy or gain any insight, please leave a review. This makes the show more searchable, which helps others find the information too. In today's episode, I am joined by a gentleman by the name of Jim Marshall. Mr. Marshall is a polymathic intellectual who has devoted over 50,000 hours to the study and practice of multiple dimensions of human potential and development. He is an accomplished academic who spent decades helping others achieve their goals while developing a technique that he then published, making his teachings available to everyone. In this episode, we dive deep into his book Septemics, who it's for, and how you could benefit from it. You can find more information about Jim and his teachings in the description. Jim Marshall, what is Septemics?
Septemics is a philosophical science based on the fact that many human phenomena occur in a sequence of 7 levels. Literally, the word septemics means of or pertaining to 7. Septemics comprises a collection of scales or sequences, each of which breaks down various human phenomena into a hierarchy of 7 steps. And these are very useful. There are 35 such scales, each of which is unique. And together, they span the spectrum of human experience, by which I mean any problem, situation, dilemma, etc., that a person has can successfully be analyzed by one or more of these scales, usually more than one.
Okay, I'm already very interested in this. So how is Septemics beneficial?
Okay, I wrote this book to help people. I've had a lifetime of helping people. Each of these 35 scales provides the user with an infallible way of determining the salutariness or beneficialness of any group individual activity. If the group individual activity moves persons up the scale, it's beneficial or positive. If it moves them down, it's detrimental or negative. More importantly, just finding out what level you or another person is at on any scale is by itself enlightening and beneficial, and always results in a realization of some kind. You'll say, gee, I wonder where this guy is on this scale, and you'll spot it, and you'll go, ah, that's why, so and so. And finally, once you know the actual level of any person on any scale, you can improve that person, whether it's yourself or another, by moving them up one level at a time. This is actually of great benefit because it solves the gradient problem. Every good teacher, coach, facilitator, therapist, etc., in the world understands that you can only help people on a gradient. You can't go from being a couch potato to being a competition athlete. There are too many intervening steps. So you have to find the right level. You have to find the level the person is at and then move them up to the next level. And I had an entire career of doing this as human development engineer, which is how I figured out this material. It just appeared to me in the sessions, which numbered in the thousands. So all of these advantages that I articulated represent major steps forward for society. Each of these scales is an axis against which to evaluate human behavior, and combined, they empower one to understand and consequently predict and consequently manage human affairs to a degree hitherto unattainable by most.
Are you familiar with Dr. Hawkins?
Doesn't ring a bell.
Dr. David Hawkins has the scale of consciousness, and it's more based on spirituality. And I feel like this almost sounds like the more psychological version almost. Yeah, I guess it's hard to relate if you don't know what I'm referring to, but would you say this is more based on human behavior then, and it doesn't really involve spirituality?
Oh no, it definitely involves spirituality. But you have to realize there are 35 scales. Each scale is unique. You cannot infer anything about scale A by looking at scale B. And this is good news, because that is why it covers all of human phenomena. If I may, I'd like to tell you the names of the scales.
Please.
Which takes about a minute, and then you'll know what subject matter is covered. These are the individual scales, meaning they apply more to an individual than to a group. The scale of basic purposes, the scale of personal influence, the scale of choice, the scale of permeation, the scale of thought, the scale of identity, the scale of evaluation, the scale of motivation, the scale of control, the scale of stopping, the scale of scholarship, the scale of literacy, the scale of human ability, the scale of memory, the scale of spiritual identity, the scale of mental deletion, the scale of aberration, the scale of physical fitness, the scale of justification, the scale of belief, the scale of equanimity, the scale of attack, the scale of conflict, and the scale of reaction. And these are the group scales. The scale of life, the scale of relationships, the scale of life spheres, the scale of government, the scale of civilization, the scale of survival, the scale of management, the scale of exchange, the scale of communication, the scale of allegiance, the scale of sexuality, and the scale of politics. Now, some of these, it's not going to be obvious to you just from hearing that what this is about. But when you look at the scale, you'll see. Because I was very careful to make this comprehensible to the average reader.
Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, each person, they have the scale. So each person fits in each scale, but they're on a different place inside of that scale.
Well, every person is at some level on every scale.
Right.
Okay, but it's possible for a person to be at the same level on multiple scales. I mean, you could be at level 4 on this scale and also be at level 4 on that scale.
Okay.
But that's kind of neither here nor there. I mean, the main thing is each of these scales is a roadmap for success in the corresponding area.
How can one determine where they are on the scale, or does somebody else determine that?
Well, anyone can determine where anyone is on the scale, and it's done by observation. It's just like this. Let's say you have a garden, right? And you invited me to your home, and we went into the garden, right? I would say, oh, she has tulips, she has hydrangea, she has roses, she has peonies. You know, I'm sort of identifying these different types of flowers because I know something about flowers. Now, to maybe a 4-year-old, they would see the same thing, but they wouldn't make that connection because they don't know. For example, a tulip grows in a completely different way from a rose. It grows from a bulb, right? There's no branches, there's no leaves, it just grows from a bulb. So that botanically is an important fact. Now, if you don't know that, like to a little kid, they're just, you know, that's a flower and that's a flower. You know, this one is yellow and this one is red. That's about what a kid would figure out. So this is really useful because it enables you to understand where you are and where other people are on these various scales. So let me try to explain this concisely. The data in this book are vital for every human being and can help you to achieve your goals faster and easier by explaining what might otherwise seem to be inexplicable or random. If someone were to invite you to a rendezvous, you would certainly expect them to tell you the time, the date, the location, and perhaps also how to get there. Needless to say, it's very difficult to get someplace if you don't know where you are, don't know where you're going, and don't know how to get there. Now, this sounds idiotic, but most people do this regularly. In fact, some people do this continuously. They just go in circles all the time. They never get anywhere. So this tells you with specificity across 35 axes where you are. It's precision. You know, you are at this level or you're at that level. And then it tells you where you're going, because if you want to succeed, you target yourself at the next level up. And you will be able to get there if you try, because that's the gradient. In other words, I'm giving you the gradients for life across 35 axes. So let's say you're at level 4 on a certain scale. If you try to go to level 1 or level 2, you will certainly fail. It's too steep a gradient. And think of it this way. Let's say you're on the first floor and you want to go to the 5th floor. One way or another, you have to go through the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 4th. Whether you take the stairs, the escalator, or the elevator, you have to go through them. So you can never skip a level. And that's a useful datum, because once you know what level you're at, you're either going to move to the level below or the level above. There is no other possibility. I've been working with this for a long time. So that helps you to target what you should be focusing on, what you should be doing.
It sounds like this helps bring a level of understanding about oneself and self-awareness, yes, which is key to any type of growth, in my opinion, as well. And the phrase that comes to mind also is, you can't manage what you don't measure.
Mm-hmm.
So my next question for you was, I think you already answered it, but how can one use Septemics to improve oneself and one's life? But given what you're saying, it would be so that you can assess where you are in order to improve, or in order to reach your goals of where you want to be.
Right.
So on the scale, what is the range? And is 1 lower or higher than, say, 4?
1 is the highest level and 7 is the lowest.
Okay. So you're really talking about floors. You're really going down to make your way up the scale?
Well, since everyone is at some level on every scale, the first thing to do is find where you are on that scale. And when you do, you will definitely have a realization or an epiphany or something. That right there will clarify your mind. Now you have to realize there are general scales and specific scales. In the specific scale, it can be used in an unlimited number of ways. For example, the scale of motivation. Isn't it important to know someone's motivation? Let's say you have a guy and a girl and they're talking about getting married. Wouldn't it be smart for that guy to know, why does this woman want to marry me? Now, if it's because she loves him, that's level 1, that's the highest level. But maybe she wants to marry him because he has $5 million in the bank, he lives in an exquisite condo, he drives a Maserati, he has his own yacht, and he flies his own Learjet. See, that's a different reason to marry somebody.
Is that level 7?
No, that's not level 7. But the point is, it's a different motivation. So for some guy might do this assessment and say, wait a minute, I don't want to marry this girl. She's a gold digger. She wants me for my money. Okay. But there are many men for whom that's perfectly okay. There are lots of elderly, unattractive, rich guys who marry 25-year-old women. The guy gives the wife a Corvette, a diamond ring, a pearl necklace, a mink coat, and a credit card. She's happy. He's happy because he has a 25-year-old wife. See, now to him, that's fine. But to somebody else, it might not be. So you have to realize this is very personal. It's all about you, or it could be you understanding somebody else. So I was talking about the scale of motivation, right? So you could say, what is my husband's motivation? What is my daughter's motivation? What is my mother's motivation? What is my boss's motivation, right? And each time you do this, you're going to have a little realization. Oh, yeah, I see what's going on here. That explains X, Y, and Z. Or you could say, what is my motivation toward my son? What is my motivation toward my next door neighbor? What is my motivation toward my grandmother? You see? And every time you find one of these things, your mind becomes a little bit clearer. Now, you asked me something before, and I want to back this up to try to answer your question. The common denominator of this entire philosophy is insight. When a person is high on any scale, it's because he's insightful in that area. And when a person is at or near the bottom of any scale, it's because he lacks insight in that area. So you take somebody like Adolf Hitler. On the scale of basic purposes, he was at level 7, which is the purpose to destroy. And if you study the man carefully, which I have, it's not subtle. This guy was destructive to everybody. He was destructive to his own family. He was destructive to his own country. He was that was his objective. He was going around destroying things. Now, if you were to ask him about that, he would not be able to have that insight, because if he had some insight, he wouldn't be doing those things. You see? This is related to the fact that it's a well-documented fact that in the mental health profession, that if a person is a psychopath or a sociopath, he will not make progress in therapy. Cannot be done. Doesn't matter how good the therapist is, because that person is at the bottom of many of these scales. And so he lacks insight. In order to make progress in therapy, you have to be able to have some insight. So on the one hand, this requires some insight, but it also develops your insight, which is why every time you spot a level, you become more insightful. And so as you use the system, you generally become a more insightful person. And the more insightful you become, the easier it is to use these scales because you're more insightful. So it's a positive reinforcement. It's a virtuous circle as you use this.
All I want to know, or all I want to do, is figure out where I am on these scales now. So
Right.
when you're looking at them, are there questions to guide you? Because I don't personally know where I would be on, say, like physical fitness or belief, or like you said, motivation. I don't know if I could just pick a number, like how to determine.
So what you're getting in here is something which I spent decades working on. I worked on this book for 25 years.
Wow.
Because as an engineer, I'm only interested in results and facts, right? I'm not impressed by opinions or beliefs. To engineering, they are irrelevant. So you have to realize that. Let me tell you how I figured this out, because that'll really help you to understand what this is. I was accepted into an elite engineering school at the age of 16, which I then attended on scholarship. Now, at that time, I thought I was going to be engineering something physical, as all the other engineers did, like electrons or airfoils or motors or whatever. But by the time I had my bachelor's degree, I realized I did not want to engineer anything physical, but rather the human psyche. Because, first of all, that is the area of greatest mystery and unknown. It's also the area in which we are failing miserably. 95% of the problems in industrialized society are the result of not understanding people. That's why we marry people and get divorced. If you understood the person, you would have married the right person and you would not have gotten divorced. That's why we have idiots running the country, because people don't understand people. And to give you an example, I know the basic purpose of every president of the United States, going back as far as Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and many of the presidents prior to that who I studied, such as Lincoln and Washington and Jefferson. Now, a person's basic purpose is what he's trying to do. What could be more important than that? Mm-hmm. So if I'm going to get involved with anyone, I always figure out the person's basic purpose. So all of this is done by observation. Now, you have to realize that first I had to discover the phenomena, right? Which was mostly done by 1995, which is when I got the idea of writing the book. Although I did find 3 more scales as I was writing it. Then I had to use this data to craft a workable philosophic system. That took 20 years. But the most time-consuming part was expressing all of this in a way that would make sense to the average reader. And I already know that I've succeeded at that because I've been seeing people use this for 27 and a half years now. There's been some form of this book in existence. So let me finish the story about how I found this out. So I was talking about wanting to engineer the human psyche. So to make a very long story short, I had a long career as a human development engineer, working one-on-one with many clients of every description for cumulatively many thousands of hours. Now, I started to notice, just incidentally, as I was working with my clients, that my clients would improve in a way that was predictable to me. Now, I didn't tell this to anyone, but I made notes. And as the decades rolled by, I came to realize that the client would be at a specific level on a specific scale that I knew. And as a result of our work together, he would go up to the next level. Now, this happened thousands and thousands of times right in front of me. That's how I found this information. I never told this to anybody. I just kept making notes. You know, a guy would be at this level, then he would go to that level, and I already knew. So obviously, this even made me better at what I was doing because I knew the outcome of the session. I didn't tell anybody, but it would go just the way I thought. Now, the next thing that happened was in 1995, by 95, I had about 32 scales of varying lengths that had just fallen out in front of me, okay? That I had already verified by observation were correct. Now, I had one scale in particular that I had been using on a daily basis for decades. So I already knew the scale was correct. And in 95, I suddenly realized one day, while pondering a particularly difficult client, that there was a 7th level, and that level explained this client. So it was obvious to me where it fitted into the scale. That was not hard to see. And when I inserted this 7th level into the 6th level scale, it manifested mathematically. Now, you have to realize I took 26 semesters of math and loved every minute of it. So I have a mathematician's appreciation of math. It's not a vague thing to me. It's something that's very real and it's happening all around us all the time. So when I saw that, I said, whoa, I don't know what this is, but it's obviously natural law, because anything that has mathematics embedded in it is natural law. Like, for example, the Fibonacci sequence. So then I said, wait a minute. I wonder how many of these other scales that I have here, besides the one that I was just describing to you, are actually 7-level scales that had not been developed all the way because I wasn't developing anything. I was just helping my clients and making notes. So knowing what I was looking for, I inspected these other scales, and in a short period of time, each of them went to 7 levels. And when that happened, the scale manifested mathematically. So in a short period of time, I had about 32 scales that all had mathematics embedded in them. And I said, whoa, I have found something here. This is natural law, whatever this is. So then my next realization was I could go from helping people by the hundreds, which is what I had been doing as human development engineer, to helping people by the millions, if I can put this in a book and get it out. So that's when I realized, okay, I have to write a book. So the first draft of it was completed in December of 95. And I sent it, when it was complete, to colleagues of mine, all of whom had graduate degrees in a variety of subjects. And they all responded very positively. They all had different responses, but the responses were very positive. In other words, they loved it. So that told me, okay, this is exactly what I think it is. This is something that can really help people. So from that point, I spent the next 25 years working on this book. And as I was working on it, there were many rewrites where I kept changing it and inserting things. And for example, there are 36 glossaries in the book. There's not only a glossary in front of each chapter, there's even one in front of the introduction. So I'm telling you the definitions of the words that I'm using. So that really helps people. So that was like a whole separate rewrite to put all that in, see? So I know that I succeeded in writing a book that people understand, because I've been seeing people understand this for 27 and a half years now, since the first version. So the typical response that people have when they look at this is something like, wow. Because the experience you have when you read this book, it's like putting on eyeglasses and looking in the mirror. You see yourself very clearly. You know, as you can see, I'm wearing glasses. When I was young, obviously I didn't wear glasses, until I was pretty old. So now, if I want to get a good shave, I need to put my glasses on. That wasn't true 30 years ago, because my eyes were 20/10. So this is like, each one of these scales is like giving you a lens for the corresponding area. So you can go around with this lens, and it makes it really easy to understand what's going on. So I'll give you an example of what happens. Let's say I show this book to a guy, right, where he's reading a certain scale, and he's not thinking at all about, let's say, his mother. So he'll get down to level 4 and he'll say, wait a minute, this is my mother. This is exactly how she is. This describes her perfectly. See, he spotted her level. So the challenge to me was to write all of this in a way that people would get, and they do get it. And the reason they get it is it's natural law. It's like when you look at the periodic table of elements for the first time, you say, oh, yeah, I see helium's over here, hydrogen's over here, and lithium is in the next level. And you get it right away because it's natural law. Or the Pythagorean theorem, it takes not very long to understand the Pythagorean theorem. And once you get it, you've got it for life because it's natural law. So that's why people get this. So I went through a lot of trouble to make this accessible. So that kind of answers your questions. How do you find your level? Because if you look at the scale and you read the chapter, by the time you finish it, you say, oh, I see how this works. I'm at level bobbity bob, whatever it is. Now, several people have asked me, what book is your book like? And I have to tell them in all candor, having gone to school for 28 years, I don't think there's ever been a book like this before. But each of these 35 scales is expressed in what you might call a table or a spreadsheet. So all of the relevant data for that phenomena is in that table. So it all fits together like a Chinese puzzle, which is the mathematical aspect of it. So it kind of explains itself if you study it. The exception being, if a person is at or near the bottom of the scale, he's going to have trouble with that scale, because the reason he's at the bottom is he lacks insight in that area. Right? So you might have some friend, who sells $10 million of real estate every year, very smart person, but this person can't get a date, So that's like another area of the person's life that's a mess, you see? So if you ask this person about their business, they know all about it. They seem like a genius. But if you ask the person about dating or something, they're dopey because they can't figure this out, you see? That's a lack of insight. So the way this works is first of all, I want to say, never tell anyone's level on any scale. It's counterproductive and it's unethical. So, how the wife says to the husband, what's wrong with you? You're about. The husband doesn't like that. He doesn't want to hear that, right? That's being judgmental. Okay? So this whole thing is to be non-judgmental, meaning find your level and keep it to yourself. Now, if you want to tell your spouse or maybe your daughter or something, somebody who you're very close to, or maybe your psychotherapist, okay, maybe you could get away with that. But beyond that, I would say, don't tell anyone. If someone wants to figure out your level, give them the book and let them figure it out themselves. Because this is not rocket science. I have done all the heavy lifting here, So I look at a person, for 15 seconds and I spot them, bang, just like that. Like, for example, I could be standing in the bank, waiting in line, and two people behind me are talking. And I've never seen these people. I don't know their names, right? I can spot that guy's level on the scale of literacy just from listening to him talk for 5 minutes. Okay? Because I know the scale of literacy. So I bump into people all the time who I spot on these scales, sometimes high and sometimes low. Like, one person I've known for several years. When I met this person, I sort of, I knew this data, although the book hadn't come out yet. I knew the information, and I was able to spot, oh, this is an upscale person, and this level, on several scales. And I realized this is somebody I want around me. This person will be an asset. And this person has been around me now for many years, and we get along great. I understand this person very well. Now, I never told anybody what levels this person is at. That would be a disservice. So the person has the book. If the person wants to figure it out, she can. And if she doesn't want to, that's fine.
Just before you said that you don't want to tell people where they are on the scale, I wanted you to tell me where I am on the scale, but I guess that's not allowed. It sounds like—
That's right, I'm not going to do that.
It sounds like, love languages, like the quizzes to find out your love language, and that's been around for so long. It almost sounds like finding like your love language, but for people that are concerned with self-development.
Right.
And it sounds like also that it makes it easier to understand yourself, which then makes it easier to understand those around you, the people in your life and your world, which just makes life easier when you can understand everyone. And I just want to clarify that in order to determine where you are on each level and on each scale, you describe
each number on each scale, right? So then you're able to decipher like a 3 from a 4 and figure out where you are that way.
Well, as I said, if you read the chapter,
Right.
it shows the scale, it shows all the data that are a part of that scale. And then in the chapter, it tells you how all this works. I give you the whole chapter and verse on what this is about. And if you study it and you understand all the words that are there, you'll get it. You'll be able to look at it. And like you can look at your next door neighbor, maybe he's problematic to you, and you could say, oh, this guy's at this level on this scale. No wonder I have trouble with him. So this is like very useful as far as having insight, having realizations about people. So
how quickly could you move up the scale, or is that dependent on the person and their motivation?
It depends on the person, the situation, and the scale.
Okay.
There are some scales where you can move very quickly, like the scale of evaluation. People move on that by the minute. I'll give you an example. Everyone enters that scale. It's a specific scale, so it depends on what area we're talking about. So everyone enters at level 4, which is neutrality. And then as the person interacts with it, he's either going to go up or go down. So let's say you had a friend from Africa, right? Never saw a baseball game before. You said, we're going to the baseball game, come with us. Okay. So this person doesn't know anything, right? So that person is at neutrality. So the person is now in the baseball game and is watching it, and he might go up one level and say, oh yeah, this is pretty cool. This looks like fun. Or he might say, why would anybody want to watch this? That's down a level. So you see, in a matter of minutes, he's gone up or down. Now, by the time you leave that game, he may have gone up 7 levels. He may be enthused about baseball, at the top of the scale. Or he may say, look, don't take me to any more sporting events, okay? He's down near the bottom. So that's an example of a scale that's quite volatile. There are certain scales that it's very difficult to move on. For example, the scale of basic purposes. Every human being has one of these 7 basic purposes. And most people spend an entire lifetime at one level on that scale, meaning they never move. This is a difficult scale to move on. So if someone has some spectacular transformational experience, like St. Paul did on the road to Damascus, if you know the Bible, he moved up a level. Or let's say somebody is in a Nazi concentration camp and survives, that'll probably knock him down a level. That's what it would take. So that most people don't move on that scale. Also, the scale of spiritual identity. When you find your scale of spiritual identity, there's a big clarification in your mind where you are, okay? Now, moving up, that's a big deal. That might take 50 years of meditation to move up on that scale. So, it depends on the scale, it depends on the person. So this is very individual. It's very personal. Although the material is scientific, meaning it's natural law, the way people identify with it and relate to it and use it varies tremendously. So for example, let's say you have a girlfriend who's having romance problems, right? And you want to help her. You say, Mary, come over here, let me show you something. And you open the book to the scale of relationships. You say, look at this. She'll look at it and she'll say, you mean there's a scale of relationships? I never heard of such a thing. And you say, yeah, this relationship that you're having so much trouble with, where is that relationship on this scale? She's going to want to know that because she's having trouble. See? So what will probably happen is, in a matter of seconds, she'll find a bracket. Okay, like 10, 15 seconds, she'll say, well, it's definitely lot 1, 2, 3, or 4. I know that because we're having a lot of trouble. See, she already threw out 4 levels, which is progress. Then you can say, okay, look, why don't you read the text and then see if you can get this exactly? She's going to want to read this text because she has already made progress by throwing out 4 levels. So she reads it, and you can help her the way a tutor would help somebody. And then come back and say, Mary, you don't have to tell me, but for your own edification, where is this relationship? You know, now if you're good friends, she might say, oh, I can see it's level 5 because she feels close to you and she wants to tell you, which is, not a terrible thing, but obviously your friends wouldn't be helping you. So if it's at level 5, that's a problematic relationship. That's closer to the bottom than the top, you see? And when she realizes that, she'll say, oh, no wonder X, Y, and Z.
So at this point, do you opt to leave the relationship or do you try to move it on the scale?
And that's up to her, you see? She might say, well, I see why we're having trouble, but I really love Joe, so I'm going to show him this scale and see if we can make some progress. See, that's the positive way. Or she might say, I'm not wasting any more time on this. Get me out of here. It's like before I told you about the guy and the girl who talk about getting married, right? So the guy realized that the woman's a gold digger. He might say, that's it, we're done. Now you have to realize if he figures out that she's at level 1, she wants to marry him because she loves him, then they might just go ahead and get married. And if he figures out she's a gold digger, she's down at, is feathering her nest, he might say, well, I'm not doing this, I'm out. So either way, I guarantee you he'll be happy. And the reason he'll be happy is it's the truth. He found the truth. He will have an epiphany. He'll say, oh, that explains a lot about this woman. You see? So what level you're at has no correspondence to whether or not you have a realization. Anytime you find either your level or someone else's level, there's always a realization because it explains so much. And you go back to the text and it tells you, there's like 2 paragraphs telling you what someone at this level is like, what they do, how they act, and say, yeah, this explains it perfectly. That's the way she is. See? So he might just say goodbye and start looking for a new person, or he might marry her. But either way, he's going to be happy with the result.
Your last 2 examples remind me of a quote I saw from you that said, emotion is the enemy of intellect. Do you care to expand on that?
Well, it doesn't have too much to do with Septemics, but it's something as a polymath I understand. I went to school for 28 years. I won scholarships and I got very high grades. And so I know a lot about study and learning. And actually, I started school when I was 3, and I've been involved in education my entire life to this very day, one way or another. So on one side or the other. And one of the things that I've learned is that if you watch stupid people, ignorant people, destructive people, they're very emotional. Look at Hitler's speeches. They're all emotion, right? He's ranting and raving. He's angry, right? That's what you get from somebody like that. But if you listen to somebody who's smart, you don't get that. Listen to Jordan Peterson, okay? He's insightful. There's not a lot of emotion in the process of him figuring out what's going on. And anybody who's good at something is like that.
I actually saw him speak live. It was great. But what do you think the difference is between those people? The ones that can they can either harness or ignore their emotions, and the ones that kind of let them take over?
Well, first of all, you have to realize that several of these scales are right on that subject. The scale of equanimity. If you have equanimity, you don't get flustered. Like you have kind of a dopey guy who gets drunk a lot, he goes to a bar and somebody says, you're an idiot. He gets in a fist fight, right? Because it's all emotion. Whereas if I bump into somebody like that, I might say, well, why do you think that? What makes you say that? See, there's no emotional response because I can maintain my equanimity. So but there are many scales. The scale of control, okay? A person who can control himself is not going to get into a lot of trouble because he's in control of himself. So people who are downscale, there are people who are chronically downscale, psychopaths, sociopaths, narcissists, professional criminals, war criminals, they're very downscale people. And all of these scales have a top and a bottom. And in most cases, both the top and the bottom exceeds the reality of the reader. Like, for example, somebody who looks at the scale of basic purposes and sees, and I say specifically, Hitler was at this level and his basic objective was to destroy. Now, some people are going to say, how could that be someone's basic objective, to destroy? You see, to a person who's not destructive, that doesn't make any sense. But also, it's at the top. Like the highest level on that scale is the purpose to transcend. That's what you get from people like Jesus and Gautama and Yogananda, okay? They want to transcend. They're not interested in worldly achievements. So these are the types of people who become monks and yogis and priests and things like that. I'm not saying all such people are at that level because there are all kinds of people get mixed in there for other reasons. But there are people who would say transcend. I don't get it. Like if you get a guy who's at level 4, which is like what I call a normal, well, that person's objective is to conform. He just wants to fit in. If everybody owns a house, he wants to own a house. If everybody owns a surfboard, he wants to own a surfboard. If everybody goes the hair long, he goes the hair long because he wants to fit in. Okay, that's a conformist. I'm not saying it's good or it's bad. It's just how that person is. This person probably has no concept of transcendence.
Do you think maybe that person hasn't evolved as much? Maybe they haven't lived as many lifetimes because ancestrally we're kind of programmed that way to want to fit in because of we have like a tribe-like mentality because hundreds of years ago we would have been killed if we were outcasts from the tribe for some reason.
Well, look, some people want to fit in and some people don't. Demographically, level 4 is the most populous level on that scale. Okay, it's about 30% of the people. Their basic objective is to fit in. This is the type of guy, he goes to high school, he gets into college, he gets his degree, he gets a job in some corporation, he buys a house, he has a mortgage, he gets a wife, he has 2 kids, that's his life. He's not trying to write an earth-shaking book. He's not trying to save the world, he's not trying to end slavery like Abe Lincoln, he just wants to go along to get along, So when you find somebody's level on that scale, it's very valuable because you can pretty much count on that person always being at that level because people rarely move on that scale. So once you get it, you've got that person nailed. You know exactly what they're about.
Interesting. Have you seen the movie The Matrix?
Yes.
Sounds like maybe if they're in the matrix, they kind of stay in the matrix.
Okay.
Before I ask you, I have another question for you, but before I ask you, is there anything else that you would like to share?
Well, since everybody is at some level on every scale, information about you is just sitting there waiting to be discovered. So you can ignore that data, but it's much smarter to take advantage of it. Figure out where you are on these scales. And every time you do, you'll become more insightful and your mind will become clearer. It won't be so muddy because you know where you are, you know what you're about. And better than that, once you know, you can move yourself up one level. So it opens the pathway to success. Because I have given you the gradients. There are 7 levels across 35 axes. So I want people to use this. So some guy in Australia or UK is going to get this book. Somebody who I'm never going to meet, I won't know his name, is going to get this book. He's going to use it to straighten out his business. He's going to use it to straighten out his wife. He's going to use it to straighten out his finances. All of these things can be easily done using this book. I'm never going to know this guy, but his success is my reward. That's how I look at it, even though I don't know the person. So that's why I'm doing this interview, because I want people to take advantage of this. Now, I wrote this in such a way that once you have the book, you don't need anything else in order to use it. You don't have to spend money. You don't have to hire a therapist or a facilitator. You don't have to join a club. You don't have to join a religion. You don't have to do anything other than read the book and use it. So what I tell everybody is, here's how to benefit from this. This is a textbook on an entirely new subject. So study it the way you would study a chemistry text, a math text, a physics text, a biology text. You start on line 1 of page 1 and you go through ploddingly, making sure you understand everything before you go forward, reading the glossaries so you know what the definitions of the words that I'm using. Because, most words have multiple definitions. Mm-hmm. Like, the word communication has like 30 or 35 definitions, depending on what dictionary, right? There's a scale of communication. So somebody can say, well, what definition is using? Well, I give you the definition, a 1-line definition. So it's not vague. So go through and study it the way you would study if you were taking a course in college. You don't skip anything. And after you get to the end, you'll understand this. Go back to the beginning, read it again, and then find your level on every scale. By the time you get to the back of the book on the second reading, you will be a new person. You will be a calmer person, a clearer person, a more successful person, because you understand who you are across all of these axes. And remember, most of these scales are specific scales. So you can use that scale hundreds of different ways.
These are the types of books that I love. I'm very happy that you wrote something like this. It sounds like it's very enlightening. And there's nothing that's more important, I feel like, than understanding yourself. And it sounds like that's exactly what it helps you do.
Right.
Yeah.
And also understanding others as well,
Right.
Because if you understand yourself, but you don't understand your husband, you're still going to get a divorce, So but I can absolutely guarantee your listeners, this book, if you read it and apply it, will save you from catastrophes, disasters, bankruptcies, indictments, divorces, et cetera, because it forewarns you. So I bump into people both on the internet and in 3 dimensions, I spot the guy as being at a certain level, and I say, oh, I'm not going to get involved with this. Have a nice day, goodbye. That's the end of it. Because I know where this guy is at. See, it's not mysterious to me. And I'll tell you something. People tell you their levels. They tell you. If you just shut up and listen and watch, they will tell you. You don't have to ask them. Just watch somebody if you know the material. And I describe that in all the chapters. For example, the scale of scholarship. Level 6 is what I call the facile student. This is a person who is very dishonest about learning. You know, he's not really there to learn. He's just sort of there because his parents want him to be there, or, you know, he wants to get grades to impress somebody or something like that. This is the type of person will tell you, oh, I don't remember anything from algebra, even though he passed it. That tells you this person is a facile student. So that's something most people don't know about. There's a significant number of students in classes who are just complete phonies.
Yeah.
I mean, they might cheat on the test, or they might just study it to pass the test. And then as soon as school is over, they forget the whole thing because they didn't really learn anything. It's like a facade. See? So if you listen to somebody, the guy will tell you this. And that goes across 35 axes. People tell you their levels.
This has been extremely interesting, and I think that the listeners want to know, where can they find this book?
It's very easy to find this book. Of course, it's sold at Amazon and Barnes and Nobles. But if you just type the word Septemics, Septemics, in the search engine, you'll get hundreds of responses, including all the people who are selling the book. So it's not hard to find the book. Septemics. But beyond that, I want to invite your listeners to my website, which is septemics.com, where you can see what many readers have said about it, what many journalists have written about it, what the reviews are. You can read sections of the book itself, and there is a pre-recorded introduction to Septemics that you can play as a new person, which I'll tell you all about the subject. It's an introductory lecture. So by the time you finish all that, you're probably going to want to buy the book because it's available in hardbound, softbound, and ebook. The ebooks, of course, is not very expensive. You can completely change your life with this book. But I want to say, this book is for anyone who can read English reasonably well and wants to improve himself or others. Now, you might think, somebody like you, who obviously is interested in improving oneself, that everyone wants to improve himself. That is not true. Okay? If you have some guy, some thug, who's in organized crime, his whole life is about ripping people off. He doesn't have enough insight to use this book. If he wouldn't read this book. If you gave him the book, he wouldn't read it. But even if he did read it, he wouldn't understand it. And even if he did understand it, he wouldn't apply it because it's contrary to his way of life. This is about improving yourself and improving others. People who are at or near the bottom of these scales, and believe me, it's grim. When you read the bottom of the scales, all of these, the bottoms, you get the dregs of society. That's where they are, at the bottom of these scales. These people are not interested. They want money, they want sex, they want drugs. They're not there to improve themselves. I calculate that about half of the human race has the desire to improve oneself or to improve others. So you might have somebody who's doing very well, doesn't have a desire to use it on himself, but wants to use it for someone he knows. Like, for example, most people have kids, and most kids have trouble in school. There's a scale of scholarship in which I tell you in detail how to make someone a better scholar. You just follow the instructions it tells you. So dad says to Junior, come here, I want you to look at this. So the kid looks at it, he says, you mean there's a scale of scholarship? Well, he's a scholar, so he's interested. And the dad could say, yeah, where are you on the scale? And in a couple of seconds, he'll throw out a few, he'll get a bracket, he'll say, well, I don't know, I'm either 3, 4, or 5. See, he threw out 4 levels. So then dad says, look, why don't you read this? And then you can get it exactly. So he's going to want to do that because he's interested already. See, and he reads it. And then the dad says, okay, you don't have to tell me, but where are you? Can you spot where you are? And he'll probably spot it. He'll say, well, now that I read this, I can see that I'm at level 5. No wonder I have trouble at school, because I explained what a level 5 is like. Level 5 is called the slow student. So then the dad can say, okay, let's move you from level 5 to level 4, and you won't be a slow student anymore.
It sounds like everyone can benefit from this.
Only people who want to improve themselves or others.
The only people that are listening to my podcast are the people that want to improve themselves.
Right. So probably everybody who listens to you. But if you take somebody like John Gotti. John Gotti was the head of the Gambino crime family. He died in prison. There's a lot been written about him who was in the public eye. All description of him is that he was an ignorant thug, okay? A degenerate gambler. And he obviously was dopey because he got caught. So he wouldn't understand this book. You could hold a shotgun to his head, he wouldn't understand this book. So obviously it's not for him. He wouldn't read it. This is for someone who says, you know, I really would like to figure out what's going on with me. Why do I have so much trouble with boppity boppity bop, whatever it is, you know? Or it could be the other way. He could say, gee, you know, I'm so good at this, I wonder why. And he can find where he is. And then every time you find a level, your mind gets clearer. It's like if you have a pond of water, you know, and it's turbulated, right? So then it's left alone and it starts to calm down. And after a while, it's like a mirror. That's what happens to your mind. Now, I've been using this since before I wrote the book, because you have to realize that this data was falling out in front of me long before I had the idea of writing the book. So I've been using this my whole life. So for me, using this is about as difficult as drinking a glass of water. I look at the person or I listen to the person and they tell me their level. And then I know what's going on with them. That tells me, do I want this person around or do I not? So it's very useful. I constructed these scales to wrap around the reader. So it's like, you know, you go into a clothing store, right? You want to buy a dress. They have 10,000 dresses, right? And from out of that, you want to find the right size, the right style, the right fabric, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? You walk out $300 poorer with the dress you want, right? That's what this book is like. It gets you down to the specificity. Who is this person? What is this person about? What is this person trying to do? So people are no longer mysterious. People are easily understandable when you have this book. Now, this doesn't invalidate all the other systems. I'm not saying there isn't a place for astrology. It's a completely different thing. You know? But this is a workable system. And because every person is at some level on every scale, it's really usable. I mean, let's say you're going out with some guy and you really want to know who this guy is, right? You can do a complete analysis across 35 axes.
I'd rather be surprised.
Well, the surprise might come in the form of a divorce court, So some surprises are nasty surprises.
Right.
So I can tell you, when I was a kid, this data didn't exist because I hadn't discovered it yet. So I made the same stupid mistakes that everybody else makes. Now that cannot happen, does not happen, will not happen.
Right.
Because I know what I'm looking at.
Right.
I can look at a person and see, this is a person I want to have around me. This is a person I don't want to have around me. Or this is a person I want for this, but not that. So let's say a guy is money motivated, right? That's not a high motivation. That's level 4 on the scale of motivation. If you are hiring this guy to sell cars for you in your dealership, you want that guy. He's money motivated. He's going to sell as many cars as he can because he wants the money. That's what you want. That's why you're hiring him, right? As opposed to if you find out that some girl is a gold digger, wants to marry you because of your Maserati, you say, no, thanks. See, it's the same level. It's a different application. It's a different result. And it's all personal. It's all what's important to you, what's valuable to you. So, for example, I mentioned John Gotti, who was the head of the Gambino crime family. Well, Carlo Gambino himself, of the Gambino crime family, he was a much more upscale person. He was, by all description, very smart guy. They never got anything on him. They never convicted him of anything. He died of old age in his beautiful home. Now, I happen to know, since he's deceased, I'll say, he was a level 4 on the scale of basic purposes. That's not low. He was basically a normal guy who just wanted to fit in. And he did. He never lived in a palace. He never owned a Cadillac. He didn't buy custom-made suits. He was like somebody from Ozzie and Harriet. He drove like an Oldsmobile. He lived in my neighborhood in a regular house. And so everybody knew him, was a regular nice guy. So because he was not a dumb thug like his successor, John Gotti, they never got anything on him. So people who knew him, who were not involved in organized crime, he got along with fine. He was a friend of Frank Sinatra, So now that's kind of unusual to have somebody in organized crime who's a normal, is at level 4. And that explains why he is widely regarded as the greatest Don of all. He is the character that was the basis for The Godfather in the book, The Godfather. That character, played by Marlon Brando, he was playing Carlo Gambino.
This has been so interesting, and I think that you have been able to give an example for everyone. Like, obviously, this is going to benefit anyone who's listening. You're going to benefit from this, your family, your significant other. I think you should definitely check out Septemics.com. And thank you so much, Jim. This has been really fun.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
That concludes this episode. If this resonated with you, please give it a rating and review. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out on Instagram. I would love to hear from you. Links are in the show notes. I sincerely thank you for your time and your presence.